I'm Mike Dworkin. I'm the professor of law at Vermont Law School, where I direct the Institute for Energy and the Environment. And there are a few disclaimers I have to make. You've sat through these, but I need to do them, and maybe they'll amuse you. I'm on VELCO's board of directors, Vermont Electric Power Company, but I'm not speaking for VELCO. And I'm on the board of directors of the Vermont Energy Investment Corp, which does Efficiency Vermont and the Efficiency for DC and half of Ohio, and I'm not speaking for them. And I used to be on the executive committee of EPRI's board of directors, and I'm not speaking for them. And I'm not speaking for Vermont Law School. And even though I'm the director of the Institute for Energy and the Environment there, I'm not speaking for it either. It doesn't have opinions. It's just full of opinionated people. So you get me. But you also get three really first-rate speakers who know what they're talking about and are good at describing it. I'm not going to run through the bios at length because they are really set out well in the promotional materials, the brochure that you've got for the program. But what you will see is high expertise, long experience, strong communication skills, both in the professional and quite literally in the telecommunications communication medium as well. And people who have had to make decisions, and they have lived with the consequences of their decisions, as are a lot of other folks. So they have not just thought about it, they've acted on it and seen what happened when they took their actions. I want to move fairly quickly to what they're going to say, but I want to suggest a little bit about how to think about it. You've heard long lists of things that are good or bad about lots of proposals. And if you actually looked at Section 248 of Title 30 of the Vermont law, you'd see 12 or 14, pros and cons. But I'm going to suggest that for simplified reasons, you can distill this down to what I call a trilemma. A trilemma's got three parts, like a triplane and a tricycle. And the parts are problems, like in a dilemma, where if you work on one, the other parts get harder. And here are the three. One is operational reliability. Will the system work? Will the lights go on when they're needed? Will the air conditioner go on when it's needed? Will the smelter go on when it's needed? Will the system function, and what does it take to make it work? So operational reliability is one. The next one is economic or financial. It's sometimes called the price, although I'm going to suggest that it's really the bill that matters, not the price, and we could talk about that at some point. And the third one is environmental sustainability, which certainly includes greenhouse gases at a vital level, but in fact it includes a lot of other things too, including mercury, lead, heavy metals, toxic solids, total suspended solids. There are a lot of pieces of the environmental part. But those three parts of operational reliability, financial effect, and environmental effect are something that if you ask those three questions about everything that anybody says, you've gone a long way down the path of moving forward. Whereas if you only ask one of them, which is what most people do, and you can pick any one of the three, but there are people guilty of only caring about that one, then you're not reaching into the tensions that have to be dealt with to make real progress. So I'll ask you to think about those three. I'll ask you to listen to the folks that are going to present for what will hopefully be about 8 minutes each, and I've said I will really try to be fierce about that. I'll ask them to comment on each other for just a couple of minutes, and then we'll open it up to what I said to some folks would be like question hour in Parliament. That means you folks get to ask questions and see what the people on the podium do to dance to that tune. So with that said, Mary, do you want to come ahead? And we'll start with talking about the situation as it looks from Green Mountain Power and to the larger world that it's a symbol of. And then we will go from there. Do you want to stay at the table? Is that easier for you? We have a volunteer.
Oh, yeah, I should see you back down. Here it is. All right. Wonderful. Well, it's wonderful to be here. I am Mary Powell, the CEO at Green Mountain Power, and I do speak for Green Mountain Power. So it's really nice to be here. Really great topic. I have had the great fortune of working with many folks in the room and have had great fortune on working on many important transactions for the state of Vermont that involved our friends to the north. So really pleased with this conference. I think it's just a wonderful topic and very timely to keep talking about. And most of my remarks are going to be captured in this PowerPoint that, yes, we're actually going to play it to music because it's the afternoon, and I don't know about all of you, but I just can't just listen to people and read PowerPoints together. So it's going to go to music. topic. But first, to give you kind of an overview of where we're headed and where we started. Where we started a number of years ago was in launching an energy vision for Green Mountain Power. And the most important thing to know about the vision that we launched and about the direction that we see ourselves going in the future is that it's really based on sort of 4 fundamental beliefs. One is that we have to be customer obsessed. Obsessed. We have to be obsessed with understanding what our customers want, understanding where our customers want to go, and maybe even trying to anticipate things based on current trends that they may not even know they're going to be wanting in a few years, but that we sense that they're headed in that direction. So it's really a piece of being customer obsessed as an organization. We really fundamentally believe that in our role, that is one of the most important things we can do. The other 3 things are really the 3 things that we based our whole power portfolio strategy on, which is around producing for our customers a portfolio that is low cost. So part of being customer obsessed is keeping that portfolio as low cost as we possibly can now and into the future. That it's low carbon. Our customers in Vermont have told us for years, decades, they care deeply about renewable energy. They care deeply about the environment. They care deeply about actually local renewable energy resources. So the low carbon part is a really important part of our strategy. And then lastly, reliability. So I heard that talked about. So it's that piece of, you know, and I like the remark of, yeah, it's true in other countries. I think we take for granted what we have here, and we can never forget that reliability is really important, and it's getting more important every single year. And another piece of reliability that you'll see tied into where we're going is that it is tied to resiliency. So it can't just be having an incredibly reliable system because, oh, we have this wonderful contract with Hydro-Québec, we have these wonderful contracts, but we also have something called weather that is getting more severe. So as we think about the future, how do we anticipate a way to get to a more reliable future? So really the short way to summarize where we see the vision of where we're going is really fundamentally moving away from the big bulk system that we have now over the next couple of decades and moving much more towards a consumer-driven, business-driven, locally driven, much more resilient system of delivery. Do we think that that means that the bulk system that we have today is magically going away or should? Nope. We actually think the real challenge for us is going to be how do we deliver in a superior way on both? How do we make sure that we're making the really important investment decisions, we're purchasing power where needed, while at the same time we are aggressively leaning into a very, very different energy future. So we call it, what we talk about at Green Mountain Power is becoming the energy company of the future. We're creating the energy homes of the future. We're creating the energy businesses of the future. We're launching a major, we just got some really nice attention for a solar project we did with battery storage that's going to be part of a microgrid where we're creating Rutland, Vermont as the energy city of the future. So we really want to be at the front, you know, the front line of making this really seismic shift over the next couple of decades, which we believe will be a lower cost, lower carbon, much more incredibly reliable future for delivering energy to our customers. We see it as huge opportunity. I'm excited because this conference tomorrow has a session on how to partner further, and I think this provides an incredible opportunity for us to think not so much about what the historic relationship has been, but what the future relationship could look like, much more around innovating for a very, very different future. So wonderful to be here.
Now, if you want an example of the theory that it's easier to build the future than to predict it, I think that's what we saw there for a while. I want to ask David to talk now. You all know I'm from the Institute for Energy and the Environment, not or the environment, and I take a real pleasure in seeing other people that have bridged that gap too, and David is somebody who's been really responsible at a statewide level for both of those realms and to some degree for pulling them together. So it's a real pleasure to have him come and talk about it now.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Michael. And Mary, that was great, just really unfair. And so I'm going to change my presentation to an interpretive dance. That would be funny, though. So I need some caveats, too. I think on the program it says I was former commissioner at the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection and former commissioner at DPU there. And so I am, like Michael, I'm not speaking for anybody except myself. As of Inauguration Day on January 8th, I was only speaking for myself. So here I am, which I'm very excited to do. Michael, I also loved your trilemma framing. So I'm going to try to fit some of the things I'm saying into here. Just to remind you all that the pieces of that are operational, was it reliability, I think was one, and economic or financial issues, and environmental issues. And I'm reminded of a quote from President Eisenhower in which he said, if a problem cannot be solved, expand it. So I would actually argue that the solution to these problems don't get harder as we layer on the different pieces. I actually think they get easier. And some of the answers to the problems are stare us in the face once you expand what the problem is. And you know, I'm not sure if there's a quadrilemma, but maybe there is, or even more pieces, but I think as we expand it, I think in a way it gets easier. I really appreciated the two panels ago and John Castle's presentation, particularly where he was talking about this kind of transition using the Escher diagram as an example. But John, I have to disagree with you. I think it's actually, it goes well beyond looking at the transformation of fish to, well, birds or something like that. We need a fundamental transformation of our energy system. It's an energy system that's been around for 100 years, that was designed with how to regulate natural monopolies, that did not have an obsession with customers at all, that was based on centralized fossil fuel that was being shipped in from other places. We need a fundamental transformation. So taking an Escher diagram and, I don't know, what, turning it into a sculpture, turning it into interpretive dance. I knew I'd be able to come around to that. So it is a seismic shift. And to see a utility thinking about the world in this kind of way is very, very exciting. And I've been surprised at how many utilities have not caught that kind of vision of the world and figuring out how to transform. And the drivers that end up in this trilemma are many. And because there's so many drivers, there's a lot of solutions on the table. We know that some drivers are economic, that rates and bills go up, that there's a huge amount of volatility. I mean, we know that, right? We've just experienced a winter of very volatile prices because of volatility because of last winter. We're ignoring economic opportunities by sticking to this old system. We want to give more customer choice, and customers are demanding that kind of choice. We want a reliable system, and I really liked Ann's presentation, and I've worked very closely with ISO when I was in Massachusetts, and I have not, it's rare to find organizations like that that have the kind of integrity and professionalism and smarts that ISO has. It was always a pleasure working with them. And I think that the rules that govern them are outdated. She mentioned looking at reliability 10 years out. That's not how we should be defining reliability. I'm fine with our regional operators looking at transmission and saying, well, just north of Boston is congested. Let's socialize costs all around the region to deal with that congestion because it affects everybody. That's fine. But how come we're not thinking, boy, reliability is depending on LNG from Yemen? Reliability is depending on natural gas being shipped through pipelines, limited pipelines coming from the south. Reliability is depending on coal. How come we're not thinking that? And how come we're not having NERC saying, well, reliability is getting more focused on distributed generation, renewable sources that don't fluctuate. We should be having socialized costs for transmission out 30 years, 40 years. It's been so interesting being part of the debates here about bringing Hydro-Quebec, Nalcor, other Canadian-based hydro into New England, where we're limited by thinking about reliability on such a short term. We should be saying, let's bring transmission in every way we can. We're talking what, 1, 2 lines? We should be talking 10 lines, 15 lines. We should be talking about transmission from far offshore wind, because the mix is not going to be the mix that we're looking at here of natural gas and coal and maybe some oil in the winter. It's going to be hydro from Canada. It's going to be offshore wind from one of the best resources in the entire world off the coast of New England and the Canadian provinces. It's going to be solar distributed. When you drive up the highway, as the last person said, we should be seeing solar everywhere. We should be figuring out how utilities make money and can be, revenue happy, and customers be happy with their control of their own electricity system. And I think those are the kind of things, that the fundamental changes that we're going to have to see. A fundamental change in looking at the opportunities of a clean energy future, a fundamental change in how we create business models, and how regulators, like I was, like some of you in this room, like those in the future, are going to have to figure out how to create the right playing field for a green power and all of the green powers. And we're going to have to think of some kind of new regionalism. I mean, it's been crazy working across states and regions in such a way that collectively, we kind of all know what the answer is. And yet it's been really difficult to get there. So I'm confident that these kind of conferences, these kinds of discussions, having the different players at this table as we do here, having academia, having business, having government of all different levels, national, state, et cetera, municipal at the table, we are going to move to that clean energy future. Thanks.
And thank you. Now, I want to invite you and to note that what I saw when I looked at Quebec's page on energy is it starts with energy efficiency, it turns to renewables, and then it has a sort of third strand which is heavy on the northern plan, the Plan du Nord, which I think has your fingers on it in some ways, and all of us wondering, whether it'll contribute to a better future for us. I know you want to talk about all three of those and maybe more.
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Professor. For those from Quebec, Mrs. Powell is the Sophie Brochu of Quebec.
It's a big compliment.
And she said to me it's a compliment. And Mr. Cash is a former commissioner from the Dept. So people in Quebec will understand the environmental agency in Quebec is called the Dept. So it's a great pleasure to be here today. I think we are proud in Quebec of the sustainable business relationship that we have developed with Vermont over a number of years in the energy field. I think that today's meeting offers new opportunity and hope, and we always think very highly of Vermont and what you have done over the last few years. The discussions earlier today show the strength of the relationship between Quebec and Vermont. I think this relationship has made us the true pioneers of clean energy in North America. And one of the projects that links us is a major contract for the sale of power to Vermont by Hydro-Québec. 26-year contract that has served as the cornerstone of our energy relationship. And it is important to understand that this contract represents the continuation of a business relationship between Hydro-Québec and Vermont that has been going on for several decades. I would like, first of all, to use today's platform to thank the Vermont authorities for recognizing the renewable nature of hydroelectricity by means of legislation that was passed some years ago. So, of course, we remain open to a range of market possibilities to export, of course, the clean, renewable, and I would say reliable power that it produces. So, before I lay out the Quebec's approach to energy policy, I would like to debunk a couple of myths about global energy patterns, because no matter how great our dream is, I think we are facing a lot of challenges. First of all, myth number one, we are running out, we say, of fossil fuels. The answer, of course, is false. There is no shortage of available fossil fuels in view. Peak oil, as we knew it a decade ago, has proven to be a false theory. They have new technologies that have greatly increased available reserves of fossil fuels in North America. Second, myth number 2, we say, well, renewable energy can meet all new electricity demand. That may be an ultimate goal, but when you look at the reality, demand for electricity is increasing across the globe, despite efforts to promote renewable energy and energy efficiency. If renewable energy capacity doubles worldwide, overall demand will easily outpace it in the near term. The myth number 3, access to capital is not an issue. Well, I think it's false. Public financial pressures, and I think in Quebec, in Vermont, we are facing those kinds of pressure across the globe, mean that public funds are not generally available to help finance large infrastructure projects. Private funders need a certain amount of predictability, certainty, and a positive working relationship with governments, in some cases across international borders. Finally, we see many nations who want to reach a target of 50% of reduction of greenhouse gas emissions between the 1990 level by the year 2050. I think we all need to understand that this represents a very strong and real challenge. Now, let's outline the vision that we have for this future relationship. First of all, Quebec and New England are pursuing the same objective and facing the same challenges raised by changes in the world's energy market. We have geographic proximity, and the values we share makes us natural partners. We have a remarkable level of cooperation between Quebec and Vermont. First of all, Quebec was involved in the creation of a first cross-border carbon market in North America called the Western Climate Initiative, in a partnership with the state of California. And let's hope that maybe another province in Canada will join us very soon, along the state of Washington as well, who has decided to be part of WCI. So to move forward together, Quebec and Vermont have agreed to open discussion at the administrative level on possible link between the WCI and RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. I can state today that I would like us to work even more closely and develop some concrete initiative. I think that if we want to fight against climate change, I think we need altogether to set a price on carbon. In Quebec, we have chosen to reinvest the revenues collected in measures to fight climate change, multiplying the effect on the market itself. I firmly believe that together we can generate even more benefits from this challenge. I would like also to invite all New England states to join this movement. We will continue to enrich this collaboration, and one area where Vermont can certainly help us is in the field of energy efficiency. I think that the industries in Quebec have done pretty well because of the WCI involvement in which we were, but I think that we are, and we're not very good in energy efficiency, let's say it. And someone said to me the other day, well, you are the Hummers of the green energy. People are not really working hard on that. Now, we have another example of that relationship is, of course, the Quebec-Vermont electric vehicle charging corridor. We have been able to extend this promising charging infrastructure from Montreal to Burlington and on to Montpelier. It makes a significant contribution to the comprehensive transportation electrification plan that is one of Quebec's energy objectives. So again, we hope that these initiatives will inspire others, and I think this is a promising project for the whole of Northeast. Now, again, to sum up, the challenge that we face today requires us to go beyond what we have already achieved. I think it is possible to deal more effectively with energy challenges of today, but we need strong government leadership. In fact, I would like to tell you that we are working right now on a new energy policy for Quebec, covering the years 2016 up to 2025, which will be released this fall. We hope to improve our performance in the area of renewable energy, efficiency, and technological innovation. There are still areas where we see a positive contribution from cooperation and the sharing of resources. Today, we have reviewed the results we have achieved as a result of the Quebec-Vermont relationship, and I can only conclude that we still have more work to do together. Professor Dworkin talked about the Plan Nord. This is a project above the 49 parallel. Nowhere in the world where you have 2/3 of your territory that has not been significantly worked on. And we want to do it carefully. And one of the things that we want to do is that we want 50% of that territory for industrial purposes and another 50% for non-industrial purposes. In the creation of the corporation that will be established for the Plan Nord, it's really included in their mission, and it is their goal. And one of the goals also is to have in that particular territory 20% of protected areas by the year 2020. So we are working hard. We are working in good spirits with Vermont, and I can only conclude that we are at the beginning of a long and fruitful journey. Thank you very much.
Well, I want to thank the three of them for, a noble version of conciseness, but even more important, a nice blend of vision and substance. I wanted to ask each of the panelists if they wanted to comment briefly on the other two. Then I might ask a question, and then we'll open it up to all of us. Mary, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, it was wonderful to hear both of you. I really see great promise in alignment, actually, in what we all have been talking about. Relative to some of your comments, David, I was thinking that, I honestly, I have found it in the context of where we're going, very challenging working within not even so much the literal constraints of the regional system and the regulatory system, but what I would call the cultural constraints of that. Because I think some of it is that we have to fundamentally work on having a regional system that is more supportive of innovation and moving forward. But, to me, you really can't get to that until you deal with the cultural substance of, there is still, decades and decades of black hat, white hat thinking that just goes deep into our regulatory systems that is really a challenge. So, and particularly relative to ISO, we've had a lot of challenges in the context of the work we're trying to do because of the very reasons you're talking about, which is it could be wonderful, talented people, but the reality is the rules of the road are still driving people towards behavior that really isn't supportive of innovative thinking and problem solving. That was really my big takeaway. And I see great promise, too, around our relationship with Quebec. I really appreciated your remarks. The work we've done on the corridor, the electric vehicle corridor, is really significant. We've only just begun, though. We've got a lot more work to do. And my kind of what I try to bring to each conversation I have like this is just imagine a world where we actually were all dedicating intellectual, human, and financial capital towards meaningful change together. I mean, it is actually stunning when I think how fast we could actually accomplish stuff versus what really can happen so easy, both in the political world, the regulatory world, and then certainly in the world I operate in, is overthinking, overplanning, and coming up with all the reasons why things can't happen instead of why they can. So those
Perhaps
are sort of
I'll show my
takeaways.
age by suggesting John Lennon could have been the tune for that.
Yeah, imagine.
Okay. David, do you want to comment on those?
Sure. I have just two quick notes. Both Mary and Pierre pointed to this, and I think it should be highlighted. The title of this conference is Power from the North, and yet both talked about the importance of energy efficiency, using less power. And I think that has to be a fundamental part of this fundamental shift. And I really appreciated Pierre's acknowledgement that we haven't even started or not very good. And I would even say, coming from Massachusetts, where we are so proud that Massachusetts has been #1 in energy efficiency for the last 3 years, beating out California. Anybody from California here? It was part of my contract that I had to say that whenever I was in California. But even in Massachusetts, it's not enough, not even close to enough, right? I forget, it's in the tens of thousands of homes that we audit every year, all of the utilities audit, out of a residential base of like 2.5 million homes. That's not even close. So for two utilities to really be thinking about how can they play in the game of energy efficiency is really important. And that brings to my second point, which I didn't hear as much, and that is, I think that the utility of you're definitely getting there, especially when you had your Ben and Jerry's up there, and et cetera, that we need to be thinking about energy as utilities as providing a service. And the service is cold ice cream, or cold beer, or a car that you can drive because it's electric, or the lights in your house. And how that's provided, it can be through kilowatt hours that are coming through your line, or it could be better lights that use fewer kilowatt hours, or batteries that are being charged at solar at night, or whatever the service is, right? That's what people care about. You had mentioned in the last panel about being in a country where the lights go out all the time, right? People aren't getting their services. They're not getting lights. They're not getting medicine cooled, all that kind of stuff. And I think that's part of the vision of the future is what's the service that we provide, which is why being customer focused is so important, because what they care about is their cold beer, not how many kilowatt hours they're using.
And if I ask your thoughts about what they said.
Well, I think that, first of all, I would like to say that we have a lot of work to do, of course, needless to say. As a government, we have been working very strongly and in the last few years to improve the situation. I was Minister of the Environment for a period of 2 years, and one thing that you realize often is that the governments do not necessarily have the vision that it takes, because there are so many conflicting priorities sometimes that it's difficult to wind up with this. And unless it's coming from communities, from local groups, I think they are the ones who are putting the pressure. And I remember very well, for example, when we talked in the field of transportation about the California standards for cars. I remember very well, I was involved at that time, and I discussed at the time with the Canadian federal minister, and he said, well, these standards are too much, it's too much change for the industry, it's too tough. But there was at the time a lot of pressure from western states in the United States, and of course Quebec has decided to go along with those California standards, and Ontario started to think about it, and all of a sudden many states or provinces decided that because of the pressure from their own constituents, that it was something that needed to be done. And after being told that it was too much, it took about 3 or 4 months. All of a sudden there was this announcement from the federal government in Washington and in Ottawa to announce that those standards would be adopted for all Canada in the United States. Just tells you that often that's the way it works. It starts at the local level and it moves up, not the other way around.
And that laboratory of the states concept is vital to a lot of what we do. Let me just look around before I start asking questions. Who would like to raise one? Is there a microphone that gets delivered?
Hello, Jose Samak, University of Montreal Graduate Program of Environment Sustainable Development, and former member of the Quebec's Environmental Public Hearings Board, Monsieur le Ministre, merci beaucoup d'avoir balayé quelques mythes. It was a good myth-busting exercise. Much appreciated. Mr. Cash, you're right that there is a great deal to be done. But I'm going to ask you a question, keeping in mind what the critics might say about that. Is it is it really a matter of will, or just determination, or clarity of vision? Because some people, point to the fact that there are very serious problems. We didn't come from fire, wood, coal, petroleum, higher and higher and higher energy densities. This was not for, it's almost like a deterministic path. For us to reverse it and go and supply all the needs of Vermont and Burlington and Montreal and Marseille and Paris with lower density forms of energy, thermodynamically, et cetera, economically, the challenge is huge. So I would say that it behooves us all to understand the significance of that and not simply tell people, we need more, we need more, we need more. I mean, we have to understand some of the inherent difficulties in what we're trying to do. That's all.
So you're asking me why I'm such an optimist? Is that? Yeah, of course. You make incredibly important points, and I don't mean to underestimate the enormity of this challenge. And I think there are a couple of answers to that. One answer to, can we move to that? I think one answer is, we have to move to that. We are going, as a global community, we're going to have to move to that. Now, I think the more rational way to move to that is to figure out a path to that goal of 100% renewables sometime in the future, 100% carbon-free, I should say. You could think of technologies that can be carbon-free and still use fossil fuels, although there's a lot of debate about that. But that path should be one that has the minimal amount of economic disruption, that supports people, that addresses issues of poverty, all of those kinds of things, and all are very difficult to do. I don't disagree with that. But I think that's incumbent upon us in government to come up with that answer. So and I think we're going to have to. And so we can wait, and we'll see more calamities, more sea level rise, more energy disruption, all of those kinds of things, and then decide to act. And then it's going to be a lot harder. The other piece is a lot of this has to do with correcting policies and communicating about them in a fundamentally different way than we have. So, for example, often this cost issue comes up. Any of you who have been in part of the rate-making process in any level of government realize that a lot of these policies that we're putting in place increases rates, right? But what we don't take into account is our dependence on fossil fuel has been on the backs of not ratepayers, but taxpayers. That we still subsidize fossil fuels, that we have a 100+ year history of subsidizing fossil fuels. So natural gas electricity might look low priced on our rates, but in fact we have been paying for that and continue to pay for that. And in essence, we haven't been honest about how ratepayers/taxpayers pay for that. Relative to that, we don't take into account what the externalities are for fossil fuel, right? So we might have very energy-dense materials that we're using and in that way become more economic, but we also have environmentally problematically dense fuels as well, right? And that's not taken into account. So in New England, we've had, particularly in the Boston metro area, although I know it's been kind of wimpy up here, the amount of snow that you guys have gotten up here compared to Boston. Oh my gosh. But in Boston, like economically, we were shut down for weeks. Our tea didn't work, and there are questions why that didn't happen. But there was lots of snow. Some estimates were something like $250 million a day in lost economic opportunity. Did the fossil fuel companies pay for that? No. The ratepayers and taxpayers paid for that. Low-income people who couldn't get to work paid for that. Right? So when we talk about all the ratepayers paying for solar panels, and I don't get them on my house, but You know, it's a very different kinds of question, and we have not done a good job of explaining that and articulating that. And we're going to have to do that to get to this future.
Okay. I feel like I'm at town meeting where I was the moderator for point. And you just have to remember the names of your nearest 2,000 neighbors.
Okay, I just want to make a preliminary comment, which is that the wonderful thing about certainty is that it allows you to sleep at night, and secondarily that it's okay to be certain and then later be wrong. So I share the certainty of some that we are barreling into a 100% renewable energy future lickety-split sooner rather than later. And as I try to visualize that, again, so I can sleep at nights, and that's not really a joke. I obsess about this a lot, like Mary obsesses about her customers. And I see that to create abundant supplies of renewable energy, we need to go to those offshore wind. We need to go to the Midwest wind. We need to go to maybe concentrated solar power out of sunnier climates. We need definitely to go to Hydro-Quebec and their abundant resources. So that leaves me wondering, what does the transmission grid look like? Not the local distribution. What does that transmission grid look like, and how the dickens do we get there? And is it socialized costs, a national policy? Is it the regional organizations? Is it the merchant model, which was brought up earlier this morning? And I would just appreciate feedback from you experts, who's ever bold enough to tell me how I can sleep at night about visualizing the future transmission grid. Thank you.
We've had a shot at that a few times earlier today, but the folks up here now may want to chime in as well. I have some thoughts, but why don't you go first?
You go ahead.
Okay. We've got a transmission grid which is characterized by this fundamental fact. On one side of it, there are 14 to 18 million people in New England and about 14,000 substations. On the other side of it, there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 to 500 generators. But there's really only about 20 or so bulk transmission lines. So we've got hundreds feeding into dozens, feeding out to tens of thousands and millions. That's why they call it a bottleneck. It means extreme vulnerability. Building around it takes some redundancy. And if you have redundancy, a fact of life is you will have things that you're not using some of the time, and you'll be accused of excess investment. But it is there in case you need it. The ability to have flexibility in resources probably requires building more than you need immediately, because if you build only what you need, then you can only get access to what you built for. So a transmission system that takes central station power, serves it to tens of thousands and distributed, inherently has tensions. Now, can you get around them? One way to get around them is to insulate them, not 10,000, but 10 million homes, so that you don't need as much transmission moved around. Another way is to put not 10,000, but 10 million solar panels up, so they're on the customer side, not the distribution side. I think that the chance of getting off a grid system entirely is a long way down the line, but the idea of a grid system that's a backup to more and more distributed has real potential. I mean, I think it's basically what Mary's talking about in 20 years. Now, how quickly do we get there? I wish I knew how fast climate change was moving in. There's a probability, and then there's a distribution of probabilities. I'm going to sound like Don Rumsfeld, if I say the things that we know and the things we don't know that we don't know. But I think that it's a strong, powerful tool that we have right now. We don't want to abandon it. And yet we want to wean ourselves off it. And that metaphor of, a child weaning themselves off of nursing is, I think, part of where we're going to go. Does anybody want to comment on the panel?
Yeah, the only thing I would add is if you're going to lose sleep, I wouldn't lose sleep over worrying about lack of investment in the transmission system. I don't think I've not seen that, and I don't see that coming down the road. So if you're going to lose sleep, I would still be losing sleep in the how are we going to get to 90% or 100%. But I would love to knit together the two questions, because in my mind, you know, some of my passion around where we're going is all the things that we've mentioned, but a part of it that we don't talk about enough is the economic story around moving to a different system. You know, we got to remember the system we have now was built over 100 years ago. And it is built, if you and I were going to sit down today and start a business, we would not build a business that the delivery system ensured that we lost 40% of our product by the time it got to market. Right? We wouldn't start a raspberry business and figure out how could 40% of the raspberries be spoiled by the time we want to sell them, right? So it really fundamentally is about tackling reliability, resilience, the environment. So it really is, to me, it's economic. I mean, and I would love you to come to Rutland and see these homes, because what we've done is, I think, what customers really want to see. And I'm not saying like, oh, we've arrived, we've just begun, but which is they want comfort, they want convenience, they don't want to worry about energy, and they actually don't want to feel guilty about when they use it, right? But we were able to dramatically reduce their footprint, both on completely eliminate oil and really dramatically reduce their electric consumption through the combination of solar, air source heat pump technology, and now we're hopefully going to be partnering on, with Tesla on battery storage. So I really think that fundamentally what you're moving to, and P.S., it's a model that it's a working class family that's going to be able to operate more economically in the future. So it's the triple bottom line. I mean, it hits all three facets. So I think that's the piece we do have to move to, and I agree with everything you said about the system needs to be there. It'll need to be there for as long as I can see. I'm not at all worried about investment, though, and I don't think you should be either.
Monsieur le Ministre?
Well, the only comment I can make on this, because the United States system is a bit complex. Sometimes I have a hard time understanding myself what's happening. But to refer to one of your points that is very important, about 2 years ago in Quebec, we had a commission on the energy issues, and we said, what should we do? And I think there were 450 presentations that were made, and the conclusion by the commissioners who were there at the end of the day was very simple, and is exactly the same conclusion that you said a few moments ago, when you said, well, the important thing is to control your energy. So the most important thing is the energy that you don't consume. Mm-hmm. And since we have in the province energy that is available in the next 10 to 15 years, we have surpluses. We may try to export those surpluses, but the recommendations of the Commission is that don't venture into building new dams right now. Don't try to go of course, they talked about wind power as well, and of course the wind power industry was not very happy about that. But at the end of the day, that was their main recommendation. Let's try to control the energy that we are using right now.
I think about 2 hours ago, sitting at this panel, somebody said, if you're worried about oil combustion, don't worry about oil production, worry about oil consumption. And if you choke off the consumption, if you deal with the demand side, then you reduce the incentive to have excess supply. Did you want to comment further? Let's see, I'm looking out here.
I have the mic, so I believe I have the mic. Xavier Deschênes-Filion from University of Quebec at Montreal. First of all, thank you very much for this panel this afternoon. It's a great conversation we are having today, especially about the future of the grid. I heard very clear comments about the vision of the future grid from Mr. Cash and Mrs. Powell, but I will be very interesting to learn more about Monsieur Arcand's view on the future of the electricity grid, especially in regard to decentralization and distributed generation. I think this is something more complex in the context of Quebec with the electricity monopoly. We have a bulk system, bulk power, huge electricity line, a huge production from hydro dams. And I wanted to know how will the next energy policy bring forward more possible change in the system? And is there any political leverage that the Quebec government is likely to bring to give more room for decentralization and distributed generation for consumers that would like to open up the energy system and potentially become some kind of prosumers, producers and consumers at the same time? Thank you very much.
Well, first of all, of course, the energy policy is expected to become public sometimes in November or in December. So, of course, I won't start to, and we are right now in the process of consulting the stakeholders in the field of renewable resources. What do we do with oil? What do we do with other elements like that? We are looking at the best ways, of course, to operate, and it's always a challenge right now because the system that we have is rather simple in the sense that most of the electricity is being provided by a state-owned utility that is owned 100% by the government. And of course, the government, there's right now the dilemma that we face is we've got really two, I would say opposing views in some ways. People who say, for example, well, you should increase the rates because that's the only way that people will stop consuming. That's one thing that is being done. Or some others say, no, you have to, especially the low-income people, they have to have rates that are really under control, and that should be your main goal. So this is one of the debates that we have at one point to understand and see what we can do in the future. So that's the first thing. About what you were talking about, the relationship, and especially when we talked about generation, the problem that we face right now is that it's an interesting idea. I think it's an idea that is, of course, worth thinking. But my first comment right now is that, again, if you compare it to other general type of energy, it is still very high cost. And the problem we face is that I have a dozen, if not more, groups, people who come with new ideas or new technology, and the challenge is always to make it economically possible. And that's one of the big challenges that we face, because no matter what we do, we got an increase in electricity rates of 2.9% just 2 weeks ago. And you should see the amount of emails I'm getting from people. It's unbelievable. So those who are saying, well, you should increase the rates and people will start, that's not real life. What real life is right now is that every time there's an increase in rates, people are complaining a lot. So again, I think one thing is for sure is that in our energy policy, we're going to have, of course, to get rid of oil as quickly as we can. That's certainly one of the first thing. For the rest, let me give me a few months to really tackle something that is smart.
Mr. Yanda. After you do, I want to ask Ms. Powell a question based on what we just heard.
Thank you very much. Richard Yanda, faculty of law, McGill University. There seemed to be a kind of culture clash between the vision of a distributed network, decentralized network that we heard from Ms. Powell, and the vision still from Quebec of bulk sales. And I'm wondering if, in fact, there's a closer connection between those two visions than we might be taking advantage of. Can we think of Quebec's resources as storage resources as well? Can we think of Quebec being able to offer to Vermont the ability to enable their goals as well by having power coming into the grid that could be stored the problem of intermittent power. This is something that Quebec's ponding facilities seem to be well oriented towards, and I'm just wondering if we couldn't have a closer connection between these two sets of goals.
I think these are the kind of discussions that we can have in the future about that. Of course, we are not, we are quite flexible and willing, of course, to help our partner in any way we can. Again, it's a question of willingness, of technology. There's all kinds of things related to that, but it's certainly something in which we can have a very good discussion.
I think I'm going to ask a follow-up on that, which is, I took a look at the Vermont Joint Owners Agreement for purchase from Quebec in some detail almost 22 years ago when I drafted the board order approving it. And it has provisions which, on a moderate time frame, like a month ahead, allow significant rescheduling, and on a shorter time frame, like a week ahead, allows smaller reschedulings, and a day ahead, it allows some rescheduling. But it doesn't seem to allow rescheduling an hour or 15 minutes or 10 minutes ahead. And it would need to have those provisions to really be a firming contract to back up variability in wind and solar. Is it feasible to try to pursue those? Obviously, it would have tremendous value if you could.
I would have to talk to the experts of Hydro-Québec on this. Very honestly, it is certainly possible, but I would have to talk to those experts before
Perhaps I could
giving
ask
you
to have
an
that on the
appropriate
list.
answer.
Yeah, and I actually just want to say, relative to your point, I actually feel like maybe in my zeal to sort of get going and get to the PowerPoint, I didn't mention it strongly enough, but a big part of what put us in a really good position to move in the direction we're moving was the stabilizing we did around our portfolio starting in 2008, where Hydro-Québec and having Vermont also lead in terms of deeming that as renewable large-scale hydro was very, very important in terms of how we thought about how we make this transition that's going to take a very long time. So I believe that there already is that incredible partnership working. We have other partners as well in Quebec that we talk to on a regular basis, hydro producers and others that are important, because right now the portfolio still is largely met by larger resources, because Vermont historically had very, very little investment in generation in Vermont. We have a lot of different plants, but they were very, very tiny. So it's been very important.
Can I take a very quick shot too? And this reminds me of a question from the last panel. A person over here asked about, well, won't large-scale hydro stop local renewable energy development? And that's been an issue that's been in Massachusetts. That was one reason someone mentioned a bill last summer didn't pass. That was one of the driving reasons. And I think if we go back to the discussion of the necessary transformation that's going to happen, the amount of renewable energy that we're going to need is going to, I think, going to provide opportunity for large scale, small scale, distributed, all of those kinds of things, certainly in the midterm at least.
And in light with the person who said, enlarge your problems instead of narrowing them, it may be that solving the what to do with HQ problem actually helps the what to do with distributed generation instead of hurting it. Let me just see, there's a hand coming up back there. By the way, we're down to our last 15 minutes, and so I'm going to ask people to try to be relatively concise. People have been pretty good, but let's be even better if we can.
My name is Mark Stevenson. I'm on the board of Burlington Electric, the local utility here. My question is, how does Quebec become more aggressive at building conservation program? Hummers aren't as popular these days.
Well, it's a good question. I think we have some, we've been really successful with industry. We have been, I was looking at some, if you compare, for example, in our industries, if you compare to the 1990 level of greenhouse gas emissions, for example, we have reduced in the industry probably something like 25% of greenhouse gas emissions, which is certainly an improvement in the last. It's with the general public that it's more difficult. Transportation is on the rise, for example, greenhouse gas emission from transportation. We have been having programs to help homeowners, for example, come up with better solutions to make sure that we have more isolation in houses in general. But I think clearly we need to do much more. And I think it's an incentive that the government will certainly be looking at, but also we need absolutely to make sure that what we are providing right now is not only reliable, but this is something that in the future will have a certain cost, and maybe eventually consumer will have a choice. You know, people, for example, I know that I've seen some suggestions from some people who say, for example, the prime time periods, for example, you should charge more during the prime time periods and force people to use, for example, the dishwasher at 10 o'clock at night instead of using it during the prime time period. These are the kind of suggestions right now that are being made to us. But clearly, I don't know what will be the exact outcome of this, but clearly we need to have stronger programs.
In the back, in the middle.
Hello. My name is Nicholas Mushinsky. I work for Renewable Energy Systems Canada. We do renewable transmission and storage project development. I have a question, kind of a fundamental shift in the way that we see our system, kind of like what Mr. Cash was talking about, and in the context of kind of cash-strapped capital investments. When we look at the type of investments that are done in the energy sector and the oil and gas industry, so for instance, the Energy East project is, I think, a $13 billion project proposed. Obviously, a lot of people would think that that's a bit of a large project, but nobody thinks that people are completely nuts to think of investing in that, when the same type of investment would probably actually even get you an HVDC line between Newfoundland and England to be able to balance both Europe and North America with renewable energy. So I was just wondering, why is there such a, I guess when we look at the transmission projects and the investments that are done in renewable energy, people often think that it's completely bonkers, but when we're looking at the traditional power, or not traditional power, but fossil fuel investments, it's kind of like a run-of-the-mill, normal business as usual proposal.
You want to go?
That's an awesome question. And you're not even talking about siting, right? So like I can think of several fossil fuel projects that were cited in New England without much kind of community engagement. And I can think of a particular one off the coast of Massachusetts, you know? I think part of the answer to that is cultural, that we are a fossil fuel-based economy and have been for many, many, many years. And so the culture of developing fossil fuel projects is one that's relatively natural. Maybe even more important is that I would think our regulatory structure is set up to deal with development of fossil fuel infrastructure, and that hasn't been the case with renewables. It's more difficult because we don't have the tools yet, and those tools are scattered, right? So if you're developing some project in New England and you want to get RPS credit, then which state RPS? We all have slightly different programs. It's a very different regulatory structure. As I mentioned before, the rules of the game favor fossil fuel, right? Because we're thinking about reliability in the next 10 years. You can pretty reliably build a fossil fuel power plant and a pipeline, get everything done. Much less reliability when we're talking about transmission. If we're talking about reliability on the decadal, 30, 40 years, the rules aren't set up for that. So, and the financing systems are not set up for that. And some financing tools just even haven't been there until recently. You know, when you think about the homeowner disincentive for solar, for example, large capital outlay with a 20-year payback, very difficult. You get new financing in the game where people can aggregate, third party can come in, rent a roof essentially, make all the investments, give long-term power purchase agreements to a residential customer. You've got a very different ballgame. And so we've seen in Massachusetts the huge growth in solar, and I know it's the case in Vermont too, is because we have these new tools. So I think that those of us that are really pushing hard are pushing for those new tools so that there can be a level playing field, because there isn't a level playing field now.
I'd add one very technical but vital point. Almost every form of governmental assistance for renewables has come in with a very short sunset in the 24 to 36-month period, whereas the multi-billion-dollar oil facilities that I worked on when I was at the University of Houston, those facilities aren't wondering whether their governmental subsidy will disappear. It's been in place since 1917. It's never had to be touched. They could build on it and build off it and recover on it. The reassurance in that realm is not only larger, but more reliable. Yeah. By the way, there's a very interesting woman named Janet Milne, who's a professor at Vermont Law School, who writes about the environmental implications of tax subsidies and tax policy. And she writes with real insight, if you want to get into the details. And as with many things, it turns out the details do count.
Tom Hutzpeth. I teach here at University of Vermont in Environmental Studies and Natural Resources. So I've been reassured a little bit by the love fest that I've been seeing between Vermont and Quebec today, because as I read just in our paper and here on the news, you know, the largest utility, Green Mountain Power, and Vermont Gas are both owned by Gas Metro, which is a for-profit business based in Quebec, as I understand it. Is that right? And so, you know, we had a mayoral election here in Burlington a while back, and even though it didn't deal with Burlington directly, one of the candidates who didn't happen to win said Vermont is like a developing country with Quebec as the first world nation, and we're totally dependent. We're a colony of Quebec. This is something we should have trouble sleeping at night. Should we in Vermont all have trouble sleeping at night? Everything's now a love fest, but how about if the politics change? Are we becoming where, are we setting ourselves up to be, you know, for vulnerability?
I think I'll back up here.
You know, so from my perspective, you know, we're really thrilled. We're, you know, Green Mountain Power is a Vermont corporation with a board of directors, and we bring decisions and strategy and everything you saw today to that group, and that's the group that makes the decisions. We're very lucky that the type of investor that we have in Gas Metro is one that really supports and understands the need for and the depth of understanding of each of the companies to do what they think is in the best interest of their customers and who they serve. So, and we're fully regulated. They too are also a regulated gas distribution utility in Quebec as well. So they also, I think one of the reasons when I was at Green Mountain and we first talked to them, I think they were the 8th investor that had come talk to us about not being publicly held anymore. And just to remind people, when you're publicly held, you're not exactly local either. It just means your investors are all over the world and all over the country.
I think at one time I was told Green Mountain Power's largest group of investors was a set of dentists from Southern California.
It could have been, could have been. So when you're publicly held, you know, you still are accountable to investors. They're just all over the place. You know, one of the things that, you know, one of the biggest reasons we made the switch was because of our customer obsession, because also being a publicly held company at our very tiny size was costing customers over $1 million a year in just different accounting and legal fees, et cetera, to comply with all of the parts of being publicly held. So from our perspective, it's just been a wonderful relationship that has worked very well, and has, you know, another part of it was they had been in Vermont for 20 some odd years, and we'd never heard of them. So that made us that made us really believe that they meant what they said when they believed in local control, and that has been absolutely our experience. So for better or for worse, I guess you can blame stuff on us if you don't like things Green Mountain Power is doing. So.
Probably time for one more And then after the question, I'm going to ask that everybody wait, and we will move into the closing ceremony and some really very worthwhile thanks. So let me just do a quick.
Bonsoir, Monsieur le Ministre. Thank you for being here. So I'm a student at Carleton. My name is Vincent, and I'm also an energy efficiency professional from Quebec. So on behalf of the energy efficiency industry in Quebec, frankly, we're not that bad. But we do agree that there's still a lot more to do, and this hinges a lot on electricity prices, as you've been told this morning by the economist from Université Laval. So there's been a proposal, a number of recommendations made in the past to use the additional dividend that might be provided to the government of Quebec from Hydro-Québec and use fiscal levers to give back to the low-income consumers and therefore damper the rate shock or the shock that they would incur on them from those price hikes. So what do you think of this option? Is it a viable option? Is it something that might help with the social acceptability of increasing electricity prices?
First of all, when I'm talking about it's not the energy efficiency that you are doing that is the problem, is the consumer that sometimes we are far ahead as a consumer compared to what's happening, of course, in Europe, for example, and even in Ontario or in the United States. So we are big energy consumers. That's one of the problems that we need to face. The problem, don't worry, it's not with you. So that's the first thing. The other thing is that we have a energy board that makes decision about the increase in rates, for example, and they have in their decision, because we've been asking for it, they've been asking Hydro to provide a plan to help low-income earners. And they have a certain amount of time to present this plan and see how we can improve their situation, because there's been an increase of 4% a year ago, and now there's an increase of 2.9%, and the inflation rate is not going that fast right now. So obviously this is a concern as a member of government, and I was pleased to see the Régie de l'Énergie, which is the energy board, ask Hydro to come up with a plan for low-income earners.
I'm going to ask David. I'll have one question for Mary.
Okay, great. Very quick, and I think your question actually shows what the fundamental problem is, because you framed it as, if there are greater prices for energy, that'll help energy efficiency. Well, the problem is that energy efficiency doesn't play in the same market on the same playing field that kilowatt hours produced by a generator do, right? So you even at Hydro-Québec or other relatively cheap electricity, you get X number of cents per kilowatt hour, right? Still, energy efficiency is most likely much less than that. And yet, the rules of the road are such that you can't compete with that. You have a better, cheaper product than generators do, and yet the market is set up that you can't deliver that product.
Okay. I think it's time that we need to move, I'm afraid, sadly. All the questions I want to ask, I'm going to stifle myself as well. So I'm in comradeship with you on that. I do want you to stay where you are for a moment so we don't get chaos as we do a turnover to the people for whom we owe some thanks, and they want to say a little bit as well.
First, I think we owe this remarkable panel a round of applause. So no one moves a muscle for just a second, or my thanks will go unheard. I know we're eager to grab a cup of coffee and a cookie, and all that is available, and we can stretch our legs, but bear with us a moment. I want to publicly name those who have provided financial sponsorship, because you can't run a conference without money. And I want to publicly name those who have provided voluntary partnership, given us advice, and provided outreach because you need advice as well. So the logos are right up there in our beautiful banner, and they are the University of Vermont and numerous subunits of it, which I don't have time to read right now. The government of Quebec provided crucial financial sponsorship. The state of Vermont, Brookfield Renewable Energy Group, UVM Clean Energy Fund, which is a student-run organization, the Government of Canada, Transmission Developers, Inc., New England, Renewable Energy Systems, Americas, Hydro-Québec, U.S., Green Line Infrastructure Alliance, St. Michael's College, TD Bank, Vermont Electric Power Company, Canadian Wind Energy Association, and the Regional Educational Television Network, RET. And thank you very, very, very much. And in terms of collaborators, again, I'm just going to say the University of Vermont, because practically every subdivision of the University of Vermont has chipped in here. It's an interdisciplinary project, energy, right? State of Vermont includes Vermont Department of Public Service, thank you. The Vermont Department of Economic Development, thank you. The Government of Quebec's Boston delegation, heroic partnership, thank you so much. Vermont Council on World Affairs, St. Michael's College, Renewable Energy Vermont, again, RETN, the Vermont Law School, thank you, Michael, Sherbrooke University, Bishop's University, Champlain College, and last but not least, Community College of Vermont, CCV. Good. Thank you very much.
I'm Richard Watts with the Center for Research on Vermont, and two things I would like to add. One, we did this conference a little differently. We had a vast pool of labor from the undergraduates, mostly students here at the University of Vermont. You've seen many of them at the table with the mics. Most of them are gone, so I'm not going to read their names, but Dan, Freddie, Nell, if you see any of them, say hello and thank you. And the one other thing I want to add is we are hoping to keep this conversation going, and so we have been doing short video snippets with some of the key partners here. If any of you are interested in being captured like that, please stop and see me. And we are also going to make available all of the video from this, but we're going to try and edit it a bit so it's accessible, and then we'll have a variety of reports and all of that to come out. So all of you are probably going to get an email about that at some point, and if you don't feel in some way you're on that list and would like to be, just drop your card off at the desk on the way out.
So thank you all for participating in this rich discussion. We've clearly had a great day with many different interests and priorities and perspectives that we've heard today. I just have two quick points that I want to make to wrap things up. Final thoughts. One is about the critical role of the university as a convener for this kind of discussion and facilitating this dialogue with multiple increasingly interconnected and complex issues that are facing society when we think about issues of energy, the environment, and sustainability. Universities have great potential to go beyond teaching and doing research and actively engaging in discussions like this outside of academia or inviting external members of society into our buildings and facilitating this. So thank you all for participating in that. The last point I just want to make is kind of a theme that was recurring, I think, in each of the panels, and that actually had to do with, maybe Louise McCarran said it in the first panel, all of our predictions and assumptions are always wrong, right? We actually can't predict the future, and we all think we know what the future is going to look like. And I tell my students when we're doing research, when they're coming up with research questions, you can't ask a research question on what is the future going to look like. You can't do research on the future, right? And our predictions, our assumptions, our projections for where we'll be in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, we actually, it's actually much more unknown than we really appreciate. And I think John Castle mentioned it again in the second panel when he introduced this concept that we could be looking at a very different world with climate refugees potentially here in New England, right? And that isn't something that many of us are thinking about in our planning. And then Mary Powell and David Cash both, again, just now, were talking about this fundamental shift, and we're just getting started. We don't know exactly how it's going to happen, but the world is changing rapidly, and I think faster than we even appreciate and acknowledge. And humans like stability. We're all about trying to know where we're going, but I think we really don't really know where we're going. And it's great to be able to have this conversation and acknowledge that openly and kind of explore the different possibilities and different perspectives. So thank you all for coming, and let's thank everyone again one last time.